I have
All
a
right.
feeling you're gonna get me tickled today.
Well, you never know. You never know. So, all right. So this video is intended to help somebody prep for teaching lesson two, the Great Commission, uh, and we want to start each video out relatively the same. The purpose of this is to help you to prepare. Um, our encouragements are don't try to change what's in the book. Don't try to come up with something, snazzy. um,
Yeah.
what you're attempting to do is present the material exactly, and you don't want to change anything until you've mastered the teaching completely. And if you haven't taught through all 9 lessons yourself, and you are not in the process with someone, um, you may not understand why lessons are where they are, why they're presented like they are, and you may not see the full connection with every lesson. But we encourage you not to change anything. If it's in the book, fine. What I presented in the video does not represent everything that's in that chapter. Um, it's just an example. But if it's in the book, feel free to use it. Know the examples and you don't have to do the jokes. Jokes don't translate. But but the examples, try to stay with the examples. Um, if you find an example in the book that's better than the one I use, fantastic, use it. Um, but these first 3 lessons, and like we said in the first video, is they're designed to get the ship moving in the right direction. And if you've never done many of these, or uh, usually from my perspective, and like I said before, um, I'm not saying that a new person can't do these. I just think it's unfair because you're trying to direct this big ship in a direction, and if you don't get the first 3 lessons in the right direction, it's going to be very hard to turn the ideas back to where they need to be. So if you're
Well,
brand new,
let me
huh?
ask you a
Yeah,
question. So brand new, meaning you've been taught this, but you've not shared it a lot with anybody else. Would it be wrong for someone to one on one
mm-hmm.
turn around and share vision,
Right.
Great Commission?
Well, I mean, and this is just my perspective and the way I do it. And I'm not
Hmm.
saying that you have to follow everything that I do exactly, but I would encourage you to, because we've been there quite a bit. We've been in a lot of situations, a lot of venues, and if you're brand new, meaning you've never been on a trip overseas, if you've never been on a trip overseas and taught any of the lessons, or if you've not been in a situation in the States where you've been a part of a conference type situation where you've taught one of these in a conference type setting. If you've never done that, I usually steer you away from the first 3 because I feel like it's unfair. I'm asking you to do something you don't have a clue how to do, and it's not because you're dumb, not because you're not spiritual, not because we think little of you. It's just that it's unfair, to do it,
But
in my
one on
opinion.
one. What about one on one?
That again, we're up to people's discretion. I'm not. I'm
Okay.
not.
Okay.
I'm not. I'm not. If somebody does it, I'm not gonna be like, oh my God, I'm gonna rake you over the coals. But I have seen people say, well, I think they'll be fine, or hey, they're really sharp, or whatever. And there's not many success stories
Yeah.
on that. I've never seen it. I mean, personally, I've never seen it work.
Okay.
Just because you need to be in the setting, uh, especially in a third world country or in another, overseas situation. Um, it's just different. and you know, again, if you don't have this mastered, and when I mean by mastering it, I mean you've taught it at least once completely through yourself, and you are in the process with somebody, you understand the process. If you if you're not in the process with someone as far as making a disciple yourself, and you haven't taught these any of these outside of you know, across the table from somebody, I just don't think you have the right perspective. It's not
Yeah.
like, again, it's not because you're dumb, not because you're not smart. You know, it's just experience. So that's just my opinion.
I
But
understand.
I would encourage everybody to you know, follow it, especially if you're new. But again, if you're with me and you're new, you're not going to teach any of these anyway. You're not going to teach these first three. But again, you know, I don't know who's going to be watching this, so
Right. Right.
if you're new and you're listening to this, hopefully I'm giving you caution, and you have a nice conversation with whoever gave you the assignment. Um, is that pretty clear?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's just go through the Great Commission and how it's structured. Um, this is the heart, you know, like the first session. And again, and when you this is another thing that I'm very big on, and a lot of people are not big on, and I've irritated a lot of people about it. But this last trip I went on, there was punctuated why we need to do it, because it was evident that it was needed, and that is review. So if you're doing the Great Commission, the very first thing you should do is go back to lesson one, and not reteach the lesson, but you should at least review, you know, like the major point. What's the major point of the first session? The major point of the first session is seeing things from God's point of view. So you'll say, we looked at vision. You could say, you know, just kind of go back and hit the highlight. What I like to do is, me personally, I go back and I say, what was lesson one about? It was about seeing things from God's point of view. I point out proper information, spiritual illumination, vision equals vision. I go back to the process, perception, process, product, but I don't reteach it. I just mention it again, because what you're trying to do is we're stacking truth on top of truth. So the point is, if God um, is in charge and calling the shots, and we're working off His vision, right? So then we need to be paying attention to what He's saying, right? Which is on top. So if we're seeing things from God's point of view, now we're going to look at the Great Commission from God's point of view. Uh, so it's just stacking it on top of each other.
And
Um,
another thing to add here is I have in all caps
mhm.
exclamation, exclamation, exclamation. Do not assume anything.
Yes, yes,
And so that's the assumption is, well, they just heard one, they got it. Now we can go straight to two. And one of the things not to assume is that they got it on the first hearing,
right.
because that very rarely, if ever,
No,
happens with anything.
it's never happened to me. I mean,
Yeah, that exactly.
I have never heard something one time and heard it. And so, if it didn't happen to me, and I know Herb would say the same thing about himself, um, so don't think that that you're talking to a bunch of super Christians that that can just absorb and apply truth after one hearing. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Um, so as you move into the Great Commission, um, it's the way that the Great Commission is structured is it starts off with the assurance within the commission, because it talks about authority, and it goes through. And I know even me, I go, here we are talking about authority. It seems redundant in some ways, but the point is, we're going back to lesson one in a way. We're saying, listen, if God's in charge, He calls the shots. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what we think. It matters, what does God say? If he's in charge, then he gets to say what happens. So I can't tell you how many people was like, well, what about evangelism? Okay, I get you. I understand. And it makes sense to us, right? But what makes sense to you may not be what actually needs to happen. God says make disciples. In that is evangelism. So disciple making encompasses that. So we need, and again, you brought this out last time about the three-legged stool, right? So the first leg is we don't see as God sees. We don't understand as God understands. We need to realize that. Knock that one out. The next one is Great Commission. We don't do it collectively. I'm not saying that nobody does it. I'm just saying, as a body of Christ in the world today, making disciples in the mainstream is not what we focus on. I don't think that's really debatable. I mean,
And even if we do say we focus on it, it is a very, very reduced
yes,
strategy that doesn't even come close to the
right,
proper strategy. And this
right,
is, I think, chapter two. I didn't realize this for several years, but that this is where the strategy is laid. Like it's like he, in the way that the chapter reads, it's the strategy is laid right in front of you.
yes,
And then, like before, I thought it was more gradual. When I years ago, like you, the strategy was gradually revealed, and then you get to chapter 8, and it's like this is, but it's not. He literally lays out the strategy and then builds from
yes,
there,
right. So
and
yeah,
it's
go
he
ahead.
builds from that.
Yeah,
This is like again a foundational point,
right,
but if you don't see, you won't you'll follow the wrong strategy.
right. So again, we're trying to direct the ideas. So these
Yeah.
people, more than likely, and I won't, I'm not. I know this sounds superior. Is that a good word? Uh, but most people have never heard this, and you're teaching them something. See, most of the time when people come to conference or a teaching like this, they're thinking that we're going to regurgitate the same thing that's been told them over and over and over again. In fact, a lot of places, and it happened this last time I was out, was on the first day we started teaching, and we had you know, 100-ish people. The next day we had 130, 140. And what happens is they go, wait a minute, you're not teaching the same thing that we're hearing over and over again. You're teaching something new, something different. And it's not new, it's old, but we've just lost it. And so you have to understand that, these people have never heard this, and you may be sick of it. If you're teaching a strategy and you're like, I'm just tired of teaching a strategy, I'm sick of it, then you're probably just on the verge of hearing
Yeah.
it. so, so how it's struck. So you're going to start off with the Great Commission, which is the only marching orders God ever gave us, and that needs to be punctuated. He didn't tell us to do anything else. I mean, he told us to do a lot, but as far as strategy, this is it. He
Yeah.
didn't. He didn't say go therefore and make TV stations of all nations, or go therefore and start radio programs, or make pamphlets, or make tracts. He didn't say that. He said make disciples, because that is
Now,
the
when you say strategy,
yeah,
explain that a little without uncovering the rest of the text of the chapter. But
yeah,
just explain yourself when you for that person that is listening that hasn't connected this what the strategy is
yeah.
yet, but they're going to teach or preparing to teach, or they're interested in what's being said. So explain the strategy a
Okay,
little.
so strategy. When I say strategy, I mean where are you putting your eggs? Where are you putting your efforts? Where are you? What are you counting on working? Okay, when all else fails, making disciples is the only thing that won't fail when everything else does. All right. So I may go hand out tracts. I may go feed the poor. I may go minister to people and stuff, and that's fine. But that's not my strategy. My strategy is to impact the individual to reproduce Jesus Christ in others. And that's the strategy. So when the Great Commission is said, go therefore and make disciples, or teach all nations, as the King James says, that means that your focus, all these other things happen, but this should be your main goal. This should be what you're after. And this is where you gauge your success or failure. Your success or failure is not in butts in the seat. It's not in how many professions of faith you got. It's how many disciples you're making. Okay, and we're trying to punctuate that. And that's what the Great Commission is about. That's why the authority is so important. It's important because he's in charge, but it's also so that we understand as believers that we can go in confidence knowing that this is the correct way to go, right? So we need to understand that if we don't present the authority correctly, then they're going to get a false understanding, because it can't be, this is what I'm telling you my opinion is. Opinion doesn't even come into it. You know, when you're working a job, or when you're, you know, when you're under somebody else's authority, you don't ask them, you know, well, why, or you need to explain it to me before I do it. They'll tell you to hit the bricks, right? It's not up for debate. This is what I'm telling you to do. And and that's the mentality we're looking for. And that's the mentality you have to have when you're teaching this. This is not debate. We're not debating this. This is very,
I think
very clear.
one of the good, I think one of the good points with the divine, delegated, deserved, and defined, those four that are listed there. One of the good, real good points of the exousia, or the idea of that out of the very being,
Yeah.
because like we know what it's like to move in a strategy that's not out of the being of Christ.
Right.
That's not out of his power, out of his will. We'll use that word.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and to me, when I do go through this, and I think it's a good point of conversation, to set the stage for, of course, the assignment that comes, because there's an assignment that's within the commission that, but if we don't lay the foundation for what the commission is built out of or off of, it's built out of his work, it's built from his power, like it's all out of the very being of Christ, which we see at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yeah.
And then the believers in the book of Acts literally display to the best of their ability, without a written New Testament,
Yeah.
they display to the best of their ability what this literally looks like, as they are the little Christs
Mm-hmm.
that they are becoming and showing,
Right.
and I think that's a big hitter there for that idea of his authority.
Right. And again, we're not giving extra information for you to present in your lesson.
Well,
We're just giving. We're trying to give you a fuller understanding. It's kind of like you know, people like you got to recognize your audience. A lot of times, your audience is going to be church leaders and pastors, and a lot of times they do things and say, "God, please bless what we're doing." Well, that you don't have to ask for that here. God's already said He's gonna bless it. God's already said, "You get in on what I'm about, and I will be there." That's part of the Great Commission. Lo, I'm with you. So when you're looking at um, what, you know, you say, well, what does God want to do? Well, the question is, if God was here now, If God came back in physical form, what would he do? He'd make disciples. I mean, he would follow the same plan that he did before. Not that he needs to do that now because he's got us. He's completely given that over to us to handle, to manage. And as dangerous as that sounds, and as silly as that sounds, it sounds very silly to me because I wouldn't trust this, as far as I could throw us. But he's got confidence in us, and that confidence comes from the authority that he has. So that's why authority is so important. Okay.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So now, when you get into point number 2, the assignment within the commission, what you're trying to do is let them know that because there is a theology out there that, and especially from Martin Luther, and I'm not criticizing Martin Luther. I think he's a fantastic guy, great singing voice, but he. but they thought that the commission had been already done. They thought it was over. They didn't need to do anything else. So that's not true. I mean, obviously we see that, but that's why going through each book of the Gospels plus Acts shows a reiteration of this isn't just a one-time fluke. Oh, it's something Matthew put in there. No, it's something that is a thread throughout. And good or bad, the early church just did a very dangerous thing. They assumed that making disciples would just continue because that's just they had no idea what was about to happen and how how man's thinking was going to take over and start building institutions versus people. So that's why you have to come. That's why you cut into the assignment. You let them know, hey, it's in effect now. There's 4. You go through the verbs. The go is not the main verb. I mean, that's huge. You got to hit that. You can't just gloss over that. Oh, there's 4 verbs: go, make disciples, baptize, teach, and let's break it down. No, I mean hit it hard. Because you need to say, I even draw this, and I think I even did this in a video. I think I did. I don't remember what I did yesterday, but anyway, but if you say make disciples is the main verb, and you start drawing the go, the baptize, the teach are all supports to make that happen. You want to accentuate that whole idea that make disciples is the deal. Make disciples is the deal. It's the strategy. The make disciples is the strategy. So you just hammer. And if you say, well, man, it sounds like I'm repeating myself, I'm going to sound stupid. They're not hearing you. Understand, they're not hearing you because they probably have never heard the Great Commission presented in the way that you're going to be presenting it. So
that's the repetitiveness that it takes. How many times does it take somebody hearing it? I don't know. How many licks does it take to get to the middle of a Tootsie Roll, right? Like the point is we don't know. They might have to hear it 1,000 times. They might only have to hear it 10, depending on where their setup is, depending on where God's going to come in and hijack their thinking. But again, it goes back to what you've reiterated with this introduction, which cannot be, like you said, glossed over. This introduction has to be like a footstool in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Because then when you get to the 7 parts of the mission, where you start talking about the difference between Satan's substitute and the Savior strategy, they're not gonna have it's gonna sound foreign anyway.
Yeah.
But you set up the Savior strategy by talking about this is what Jesus did,
right?
And this is what it looks like,
right?
And so I love the comparison.
Yeah. Well, and there's some people that will say they don't like this style of breaking down the commission, okay? Because they'll say they'll say, well, that's a very American style, thing, and every other country isn't like America. And I've heard that before, and they'll actually, instead of teaching it this way, they'll teach it. I think it's like the four M's: you march, make, mature, and multiply. The four M's. Okay, that's the way they present it, right?
You heard that.
Yeah. Well, I don't mind it. I just don't think it's as effective, because this is why. It draws out from it draws those 4 points from the Great Commission, but it doesn't dissect the Great Commission along the way. This dissects the Great Commission along the way. And here's another thing I would encourage you to do, no matter who you're talking to, American, international, it doesn't matter. Whatever you do, do not say don't point fingers at them, okay? Because people will automatically get defensive and they will shut down their hearing, right? Well, who are you to tell me how we're doing it wrong, right? This is the way I always present it, and I present it, and I learned this early on. I think it took me a couple years, but I finally, God hit me with a brick, and I presented it like, I don't know what goes on here. I don't know what goes on in your church. I don't know what goes on in your country. I don't know what goes on in your community. But let me tell you what happens in my community. Let me tell you what happens in my church. Let me tell you what happens in my country. And I always present it like that. In fact, I presented it in such a way in the last trip that I made. They actually said, would you stop saying that? They actually told me to stop saying that, because they identified everything that I said was happening in their location. And they gave me freedom to dissect what they're doing, what's going on. You know, so I was probably over cautious, but it worked, right? They, instead of some imposing my will on somebody, they invited me into it. So that would be a big encouragement. So, like, when you start breaking down the commission, all the personnel, all of you, and again, I say, I don't know what happens in your country, but let me tell you what happens in mine. Okay, not everybody gets involved. Not everybody does. I'm not speaking. I don't know what's going on here. I don't live here. I don't know you. I know you barely. So I'm not going to tell you what happens here, because that's not. I can't. So when you come from that standpoint, uh, it's very, very, very effective, because these 7 steps is not a country issue; it's a people issue. These are things that we naturally fall into, just being human and breathing. Right? We don't send everybody. We look at people as not capable, or whatever causes us to do it, and that that the clergy and laity example is because we like pecking orders. We like it as human beings, and we line up in pecking orders, um, right? And hey, I'm really good at this, and you suck at it. Why don't you pay me, and I'll do it for everybody?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, please don't say that. Uh,
Yeah.
but it basically comes down to, like one example that I have about this. I was in a country, and this guy said, "Listen, I'm a businessman, and I don't have time to make disciples. What if I pay somebody to make disciples for me?" And I said, "I like your idea. I think it's fantastic, but no, God didn't say that. God didn't say, if you're a businessman, go make disciples through someone else. He didn't say that. So you're missing the point. It's not that you alleviate yourself of the responsibility. It's you need to make them for you, because it's going to develop you, right? That's why the layman never gets developed. He just lays dormant, because nobody's giving him an assignment. Nobody's giving him a task. The commission doesn't even touch him. So,
And isn't it accurate to say that most people that are intrigued with the Word of God,
Mm-hmm.
with any text in the Bible, are going to somewhere be connected to a system of hierarchy.
Yes.
And that usually is what we would call the church.
Yes.
And so that's where your clergy and your laity is the example that Herb uses
Mm-hmm.
here,
Yes.
because even back when he wrote this, which was 30 plus years ago, right?
Yeah, I don't
Something
know.
like that.
Yeah.
90s. It was in the early 90s, for, if I remember copyrights, but whatever. Nonetheless, times were different then. Like, even now, so more is there. Um, is there a little bit more of a disconnect with people going to the church? But
Mm-hmm.
you throw the church away, and most people are going to understand hierarchy one way or the other.
Yes.
And the hierarchy is always, and I love the idea of the very first one, which is employ all personnel. But if you think about it, a man building empire, which I would even say kingdom and empire, are a very good contrast, like clergy and laity. Not that clergy are compared to empire, but it's a contrast of the person that is trying to do it for themselves will only want others to help for their own
Right.
selfish.
Right.
And we just have adopted that same principle
Mm-hmm.
very often in church. We've adopted that same worldly principle that I need this guy for me. And that's the exact opposite, because the strategy of Jesus is he needs all of us for them.
Yes. Right.
And that's a very good conversation piece to have if somebody were to ask you a question about, well, how do you employ all people? I
Yeah.
don't know how to
Yeah.
get the people that are stagnant, or the people that
Right.
only come once a month, or once. How do you, what do you do?
Right, right. So that's going to be, what this lesson should do is stir a lot of those questions, right? So you can't teach the lesson in such a way to try to cover all questions. Uh, by the end of this lesson, they should be reeling on, holy crap, we're we are really missing the boat, because what you're doing is you're drawing every one of these points out of the Great Commission, and it's not, and it's you're basically saying, okay, well, if I'm not presenting this correctly, if you disagree with me, then what does it mean? It's pretty clear what it's saying. So if it's not, if you're trying to deny the clarity, then I don't, you're just not wanting to do it, and you're just thinking, if you can knock me out, then I don't have to do it. And if that's fine, if people want to take that stance, I'll give it to them. Well, fine, don't do it, because we know that not everybody's going to do it. And you brought a good point. What about the people that are only, you know, casual passers-by? Well, they can't be disciples, because that's not what, we'll get. That's part of the vocabulary, but we'll get. But the point is, we're not necessarily trying to answer those questions, but we're trying to, without a shadow of a doubt, from the scripture, show you this is what we're supposed to do, and this is how the enemy has diverted our attention at every point of the commission, has diverted us from our mission. And that's what you're trying to, punctuate, right?
It
That.
well, and you could say it like this too. This would maybe help in an elementary way. Not We're not dumbing stuff down,
No.
but the gospel in itself is is heard through the strategy, through the actual movement of making disciples.
Yes.
So I would say at this juncture that you are allowing people to feel the weight as God unveils to them their responsibility
Right.
to do this. It's not on the clergy. It's not on the elders. It's not on the higher people.
Hmm.
You're just taking the weight and you're
Yes.
handing it over. And guess what? You can throw that weight around on people,
Yeah.
and they'll dodge it,
No, sure.
and that's okay. But that's all chapter two tends to do
Yeah.
when you get to the substitute versus the strategy, because, like you said, it's to get you to the point to think at the end of it, okay, I've seen something I've never seen before. Now all of a sudden I realize I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Right.
And then and you're just, it's like the weight keeps getting heavier, and
Right.
you're,
Because
it's intended.
you're spiritually pulling their pants down around their ankles. I mean,
Exactly.
it's an
I
exposure.
wasn't going to say that,
Yeah.
but
But it is an exposure to where, whose strategy are you following? Because
yeah.
most of the time, not always, you may hit that one rare place where they're doing this better than anybody. Okay, and it might, maybe, I mean, if you do, hallelujah. I mean, great. Then your job's done. You've done what you're supposed to do. But most of the time, it's going to come out because they're going to see themselves through the misuses of this strategy and not the correct uses. It's we're not going to, we're not going to, and I don't want to necessarily go through all the 7 points of this, but we don't include everybody else. We're trying to focus on ourselves. We're not making disciples. We're making good people. You know, we're 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 hung up on the wrong thing. We're agonizing over, just like one of the examples, baptism. Is it important? It's important, but it's not all important. It's a part, but it can't be the focus. I don't know how many people are so focused on that. You know, well, what goes baptism? Well, I don't care if you agree with it. You're commanded to do it. that, that's that's the rub. Doesn't well, it don't make sense to me. Who cares if it makes sense to you? That's not the prerequisite. It doesn't say when you understand this and it makes sense to you, go make disciples. It doesn't say that. It says make them. So the question is, are you going to trust what God's saying, or are you going to trust what your brain is telling you? And I'm not telling
Well,
you, huh?
and that you bring out a point about the enlisting,
Yeah,
right? In the baptizing,
yeah,
the enlisting, um and I have actually personally wrestled with that one with individuals before, in another country, that baptism is it is necessary for salvation.
yeah, yeah,
You will run across this, and as I have, not just in the country that I was in that this came up, and it's still somewhat of an issue. This has been people I've talked to before that believe some of these things are necessary for salvation.
yeah,
And I'm not going to step in and say that I think I figured it out or not, but if 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 after you teach this and those questions start to arise where they try to peck away at what not doctrine is, this is not so much doctrine as it is trying to show you what the Great Commission is to be, how
yes,
it is to be done, what the strategy is,
yes,
then that's when you say you need to come see me or see somebody else after, or defer to somebody that you would like to answer that question about, because baptism is a very challenging doctrine that, when you've got different denominations that could be ministering, could be hearing, you will open yourself up to challenges. That's one thing to be careful about.
yeah,
But like you're saying, the truth's the truth, and
right,
the truth is that baptism doesn't save us any more than going and jumping in pool saves us whenever we've got filth and sin on us.
Right.
It's not the point of salvation.
Right.
It's the point of enlisting. It's the
Right.
point of this is you identifying with the death, with the burial, and with the resurrection of Jesus. You're identifying with the Savior, with the rabbi you're following, and you're doing his strategy. You
Right.
are a part of his strategy.
Right. And um, one thing as Americans we have to be careful of is in this country it's not that big a deal, right? Mostly, I don't say never, but it's mostly not a big deal because it we don't get the impact of it. But there are some countries that when a person can profess Christ all day long and they don't care, but as soon as they're baptized, they're marked for death.
Right.
So that will tell you right there they get it. They understand that this is identifying that everything is dead. Now I'm raised, and
Great point.
yeah. So
Fabulous.
so present. You know, even if even if you don't quite get it at this point, present it
Stick to
anyway.
the, yeah,
Stick to the script.
stick to the script.
Yep, stick
Stick
to it
to the script.
because
Don't
because
wrestle with something you've never wrestled with.
most of the time, I won't say all the time, but most of the time, when you present this in as correct a way as you can, in a good way, it's going to invoke almost like a panic movement of people. They're going to be like, "Oh my God, we're not making disciples. Let's go make them," right? And they're going to think, how do we do this? How do we get it done? And that's great because what that means is you've knocked the stool out from under them. You've knocked it out from under them. Now they're wobbly, and they're looking for those answers, right? But that comes in the next lesson. So that's why this, presenting the first lesson, seeing things from God's point of view, the Great Commission, it's our only marching orders. It's the only thing that we've been called to make happen, make this happen. Okay, and then the next, you see, so if you don't present this one correctly, then the next lesson isn't going to have the punch it needs. So you need to make sure that you just follow. And we basically covered the lesson, even though we haven't gone through every little bit of it. But we basically told you the two main points, which is the assurance and the assignment within the commission. I don't think there's anything. Is there anything? There's not a third point, is there? I can't remember.
Well, I mean, yeah, it depends on how you take. My notes are the exact same information,
Yeah.
but I have it broken down where it's the verbs are a part, and then then it is the assignment within the commission, and then you go back through and do the
Yeah.
seven. But
Right.
you could come up with
Yeah.
something to say that would, but it's not worth it
No.
because the
You're
point
packing it.
being, well, and this is one thing that while you were talking, it reminded me of something that Dillingham said to me not too long ago. Um, and he was listening to me teach somewhere. He was there. It was a Wednesday morning. It's been a year or two ago, and like the oxygen left the room in the name of Jesus.
Mm. Yeah.
It was like, and he said, "You gave him breath too quick."
Yeah. You
And
alleviated
I
the
will,
tension.
and I exactly, and I would tell the person listening as we close this out, as we get to a closing, I would say you've got to get comfortable with people being uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
because this is going to literally you if you know three, you are gonna want to start uncovering three, but you can't do that.
Yes.
You've got to finish with two, and yes, you can go back and highlight vision.
Yeah.
You can go back and even say the idea of proper perception plus process. Isn't it? I can't even remember what the
Your
formula.
perception determines your
Perception.
process, determines your product.
So that's where I think that's chapter one, chapter two, chapter three.
Yeah.
I think that perception, process, and product are chapter one perception,
Mm-hmm.
chapter two process, and chapter three product.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had to learn to leave them hanging,
Yeah.
let them hang,
Right.
let them wrestle, let them wait, because then when the guy that gets up to do number three, it's like that all hope is going to be gone at the end of three if they do what they're supposed to
Right.
do. So again, I'm just reiterating and saying, be okay with the tension that this thing creates, and let them sit in it,
Yep.
and let them sit in it,
Yep.
and it will God will have mercy on them, because God has had mercy on
Yeah.
me, and God has had mercy on you.
Yep.
And yes, it will hurt like hell.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it will be painful, but it's a part of the process.
Right. Right.
A part of the process.
And understand your job. Let's say that you're not teaching one, two, and three. Sometimes depending on the personnel, if you have everybody but is new but you, and you're teaching all three of them back to back, then you can piggyback off yourself. But understand that if you're just teaching two, somebody else is teaching one, you're teaching two, you're teaching three. You want to set up the guy that's teaching three, or the person
Yeah.
who's teaching three, with with them going, give me some answers. Okay, give me something to help me get a direction, because now they're going to want to run in panic mode.
Yeah.
They may not. Some people may go, God said it, but I don't want to do it, and I'm not going to do it. Okay, well that's fine. And it's not fine, but I mean it's your call. However you want to handle it. But
The last little thing that I have right here, at the very end before the world famous violinist illustration,
mm,
which is a phenomenal
mm,
illustration to end with. You put it in there wherever you want, but the uh, the statement which sums up, I believe, the last part of chapter two,
mm,
which is, for every great plan our Savior taught, the enemy has given a counterfeit.
mm,
And
absolutely.
when the revelation hits that we have accepted his counterfeit,
Yeah.
that's when
Right.
and that's when you say you go into the mode of, oh, okay, we got to do something.
Yeah.
We got it.
Right.
But that's where you've got to let them wrestle.
Mm-hmm.
You got to let them go, and you got to let the word and the Lord still do the work. But again, this is a hand and flipping glove, man.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Like
Yeah.
you like that's the beauty of this teaching.
Yeah.
Is it is like a hand is literally fitting into a glove, and it is a remarkable way to teach the
Yep.
strategy of Jesus.
So at the end of when you've taught everything in chapter two, then what you need to do is go back and just hit the main points. Is say it's about his authority. He's in charge. He calls the shots. He's given us his authority to act in his absence. However you want to say it, and then go through each point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Just reiterate, just so, because you want to repeat it again, and then it's kind of like a little mini review inside your lesson. So,
Yeah.
um, and then again, your encouragement is, be careful not to walk on somebody else. I know it's fun, it's exciting to say the neat things, but you gotta let the next guy have some crumbs as well. You know, don't steal thunder. And I'm really bad about doing that at times, and I do it by accident. I really don't do it on purpose. It's just you know, there's a lot of other stuff in the strategy, in the other lessons that are anchored in here, and it's easy just to, you know, accidentally say something. But
That's a good
just kind of be on your guard about that, because especially if the spirit is behind you and you're teaching this lesson and you feel the spirit and you feel that, you know, that freedom and stuff, it's hard not to just ramp it up. You know, but you know, again, you know, if you're new, you may be too paranoid to think, you know, to even pay attention to that. I don't know.
Well, and another good thing you bring a good point up is don't be offended. I've had this happen to me.
Mm,
I say recently. I won't. We went into detail about it, but don't be offended if somebody gets up that is your discipler or that is further along than you, and if they don't correct, they might add to some things you nervously left off.
yeah.
Don't get offended by someone else coming in to help fill in some holes,
Yeah.
or because it's a team thing.
Yeah.
And even when we teach strategy in other countries, or even when we teach strategy in kind of the new locations, I would expect somebody that I know well, or have even discipled, that would
Mm-hmm.
maybe come up after me, clean up some of the, we can miss stuff,
Sure.
we can forget stuff. So
Absolutely.
don't be offended if somebody gets up and it seems like that they are reteaching some of your stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe they just feel, especially if it's someone that has not authority. It's not the right word. Somebody that
More
has
experience.
impacted you. Yeah, more
More
experience,
experience. Yeah.
because they might be led by the
Right.
spirit, because they hear something or see something or sense something. So
Right. Right.
don't get offended by that.
So if also, and you bring some a good thing, you brought up a good thing, and that is, sometimes they may go back over something you said just to punctuate it again, or you may have thought you covered it thoroughly and maybe you didn't. Um,
That's right.
don't sweat that. And
Yeah.
also, since you brought it up, let's say that you are teaching lesson two and the person who taught lesson one maybe missed some things. Maybe they dropped something, or maybe they didn't punctuate something like they should have, or if for some reason whoever is in front of you was not experienced and they ended up in the unlucky position. I won't say luck, but you know, unfortunate position
Yeah,
of
unfortunately, that's a good word.
of of trying to teach a lesson they weren't ready to teach, and you may have to go back and really try to redirect it. Um, but you know, if you're in charge, then you make your own decision on that. But if you're not in charge, I would definitely, um, you know, confer with whoever is in charge, and that includes myself as well. Um, hey, you know, if because I'm part of, I can be part of a team as well, and submit, you know, submit myself under people's, you know, leadership, and I'd go to them and say, look, you know, what do you want me to do there? You know, you want me to go back? You want me to do? And if they say no, don't go back, then you don't go back. You got to follow that. But
Yeah,
that's a great point to bring out.
yeah.
All right. So anything else we need to cover on that?
I think we went longer than we expected, but this, from my
Yeah.
experience, has the potential to be an hour at least,
It
and
depends.
longer. But it depends on the situation.
Hmm.
But this information could be, it is that detailed. This is probably the most detailed lesson, as
Yeah.
far as with the breakdown
Yeah.
of those seven. It can be very intense.
It can be, but it actually isn't the longest. What could be the longest? What could be the longest? We'll say it when we get there. But
I'm not gonna I'm
yeah,
not gonna assume I know what that
yeah.
one is.
Anyway, yeah.
I will wait.
But again, and one thing we didn't mention on the first session, or the when talking about lesson one, be careful of your question and answer if you do that. Decide what it's okay to say we're not going to answer that, or you could say, well, that doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about, or I that's a great question, but it's going to be answered later. you know don't worry about don't let people goad you into answering questions that prematurely.
Yeah,
All right,
sounds
you
good.
good?
It's good stuff.
All
Good
right,
stuff.
thanks, man.
Yeah, man. Good.